Welcome back to all of you. Great to see so many again. So I'm Leonie de Jonge, Assistant Professor in European Politics and Society, also at the University of Groningen. And before I introduce today's speaker, let me just say a few words about our lecture series, because it's already the first installment of this, the fifth installment of this lecture series. So I will keep it short because it is lunchtime for us and it's almost bedtime for Ben Moffitt, who is joining from Australia, where it's currently 10 p.m. So in this lecture series, we're bringing together different approaches to understanding the connections between populism and popular culture. So the questions that we've been asking in this series are things like, what does it mean when populism takes the shape of popular culture, or when popular culture disseminates populist discourses? What role does the audience play in all this? The speakers we have lined up for this lecture series are approaching these questions from a range of different perspectives and disciplines. We've already heard from Mario Dunkel, who discussed the role of populism and popular music. I think he's in the audience. We also have heard from John Street, who talked about populism and celebrity politics. I think he's also in the audience. Then we heard from Evian Leidig, who talked about populism of the algorithms, notably by discussing how female far-right influencers use gendered narratives on social media for recruitment and radicalization. Then 2 weeks ago, we heard from Ruth Wodak, who talked about the normalization of the far right in Austria and beyond. And finally, this week, we will hear from Dr. Benjamin Moffitt, who will share insights on the way populists use popular culture to appeal to the people. Now, before I introduce the speaker, please bear with me as I thank our sponsors, because this lecture series is brought to you by the Groningen Institute for the Study of Culture, the Research Center for the Arts and Society, the Research Center for the Study of Democratic Cultures and Politics, and the research project Popular Culture and the Rise of Populism, Popular Music and the Rise of Populism in Europe, financed by the Volkswagen Stiftung. Okay, with all of that out of the way, it's my great pleasure finally to introduce Dr. Benjamin Moffitt. Dr. Moffitt is a senior lecturer in politics and Australian Research Council DECRA Fellow at the Australian Catholic University in Melbourne. He's the author of several highly influential books and articles in the ever-growing field of populism research. He's mostly known for his very original and valuable insights on how we define and conceptualize populism, notably by adding stylistic features to the definitional mix, thereby observing that populism is not just about ideas, but also very much about behavior. He has written a range of wonderful books, including Populism, just the term populism, which was published by Polity in 2020, as well as his 2016 book on the Global Rise of Populism, Performance, Political Style, and Presentation, which was published by Stanford University Press. And he's currently writing a book about the visual politics of populism, which I really cannot wait to get my hands on. Ben, we are really, really honored to have you with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leonie, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to be part of this fabulous lecture series. It's right in my alley, and it's so exciting having all these different interdisciplinary all these interdisciplinary approaches kind of coming at the same topic together. We so often get caught in our kind of avenues when we talk about populism. So I think this is a real step forward. And very exciting to see some familiar faces in the crowd. I can see the names, and thanks to those who are also unfamiliar. So, as Leonie said, I'm going to be talking about populism, performance, and political culture today. My basic argument is that populism is not only about what political leaders say about the people and the elite, it's also about what they do. It's about how they perform and how they act. And I want to talk a little bit today about the tropes behind populist performances, consider the way that populists use popular culture to appeal to the people, and also consider a bit about the role of outrage and bad manners in populism. So the way I'm going to do this is talk firstly about Leonie mentioned this notion of populism as a political style. I'll explain what I mean by that, how I developed that, what's different to kind of mainstream approaches to populism. I'll go and talk about the relationship between what I call bad manners and popular culture. I'm going to talk a little bit about popular culture, populism and taste, and then kind of wrap up by going, why populism? Why now? Why does populist performances have such kind of media cut through and purchase at this particular historical moment? And I'm not drawing from one paper or anything here. These are a few of my books that I'm kind of drawing different concepts from. It's kind of an overview of some of my work and my colleagues' work in this field. So let me start by just kind of situating the different approaches to populism very briefly. I know you if you've been attending these lectures, you probably have heard some of these, or you're at least interested in these. So I'll just go through briefly. This is from my book, the 2020 book, Populism, where I try to kind of map the three main approaches to populism and what the differences between them are. The one you would all most likely be familiar with is the idea of populism as an ideology. I don't really need to go through that. So many of you can probably, have memorized Casmuta's definition: people, elite, people are homogenous, it's anti-pluralist. You got all those, you got populism. Then there's the strategic approach to populism, far more common in areas outside of Europe, places like Latin America, Southeast Asia. The notion that populism is a way of organizing the people. It's a way of organizing followers who have low levels of institutionalization. Then there's what I call the discursive performative approach to populism. Not the catchiest name, I admit, but it brings together kind of two schools of thought about populism. And it's the notion that it's a discourse. So you would have heard that from Ruth Wodak, kind of the doyen of populism as a discourse studies. There's the approach from the Essex school. So the Leclercians, the Moffians, who see populism as a discourse. And then there's those like myself, Pierre Osterguy, who see populism as going beyond kind of mere discourse, going beyond words, and actually being about how actors situate themselves, how they present themselves, how they use fashion, how they speak, how they use cultural references and the like. I think the most important thing to note when you kind of compare all these is that second line there. Is it populism seen as an attribute or a practice? That's the big distinguished feature, I think, between the ideology, the ideational approach. It's an attribute of character. We look at political actors and we say, that's a populist or that's not. And it's an attribute because it's something that they believe. Whereas discursive performative scholars of populism rather see that populism is something that is done. It's something that's we know it because it's the way that political actors, what they say, what they write, or how they act. My specific contribution to this literature has been developing the concept of populism as a political style, for better or worse, some scholars would argue. Actually, I drew on a number of Dutch scholars and kind of getting to the this term political style had been used throughout the literature on populism, but no one really fleshed it out. And to flesh it out, I actually drew on scholars like Frank Ankerschmidt, Dick Pelz, and scholars of rhetoric to come up with this notion of political style to get to what I think is a more cohesive and true understanding of how populism actually operates. I define political style, not populism, I'll get to that in a sec, but political style as the repertoires of embodied, symbolically mediated performance that are made to audiences that are used to create and navigate the fields of power that comprise the political, stretching from the domain of government through to everyday life. And my aim in developing this kind of concept was to offer a social scientific category that took account of the rhetorical, discursive, and aesthetic aspects of political phenomena and framing them under the rubric of performance and style to take account of the intensely mediated and mediatized conditions of contemporary political life. And from there, I think there's three main features of populism as a distinct political style. The first is an appeal to the people versus the elite. I don't think I need to get into that too much. I think you guys will have heard this for weeks now. But I've got Nigel Farage there. He was always talking about the true people, the real people, the little people of England against, the elites who are in thrall to the EU. The second feature is what I call bad manners. What I mean by this is a coarsening of political rhetoric and a disregard for appropriate modes of acting in the political realm. And elements might include things like the use of slang, swearing, political incorrectness, being overly demonstrative and colourful, as opposed to kind of the high behaviours of rigidness, rationality, composure, use of kind of technocratic language. And I think there's no better example in recent years of that than Donald Trump, who of course kind of took these bad manners to an extreme that I previously thought impossible. Between him and Rodrigo Duterte, I think who were not in my mind, obviously, when I wrote this book in the first the first half of the last decade. I almost couldn't believe what was happening in front of my eyes. It's important to note that what is bad manners in one context obviously differs from another cultural context to another. And I'll come back to bad manners in a bit. The third feature is the performance of crisis, breakdown, or threat. The idea here is that populism gets its impetus from the perception of crisis, breakdown, or threat, and at the same time aims to induce crisis through dramatization and performance. And this in turn leads to the demand to act decisively and immediately. So again, I've got an example here. Hugo Chavez, he ramped up his populist style throughout his political career of a perceived crisis regarding an imperialist conspiracy perpetrated by the United States. It started small and then got bigger and bigger and bigger as his political career went on. So if you got those three features, that you've got populism, according to me, according to the political style approach. I always think it's good to have kind of, what is the opposite of populism? And I see a technocratic political style as being the opposite here. And I don't mean technocracy necessarily as a mode of governance or an ideological disposition, but as distinct embodied performative phenomena. And I think you can see these differences if you think about that infamous, I think it was the second debate between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton that just illustrated this beautifully. On one hand, you had Donald Trump, appealing to the people against the elite, whereas you've got Hillary Clinton's kind of appeal to expertise, trusting, specialist training. On one hand, we have Donald Trump's bad manners, him kind of skulking around behind her. I don't know if you remember this, totally against kind of the rules. I don't know if they had rules against this, but he didn't care, as opposed to, Hillary Clinton acting in the proper manner we expect of politicians. And the third being, Donald Trump's impending crisis, American kind of carnage idea versus Hillary Clinton's, stability, progress, building bit by bit. So I think it's always good to have a kind of opposite to work from, and I think technocratic style is the opposite of the populist political style. So let me get down to bad manners a bit more. One of the reasons I use this term, and I know it's a colloquial term, bad manners, is it has a almost intuitive sense. You have an intuitive sense as soon as you see it when what I'm talking about, if we see bad manners in politics. So the looseness of the term, as I said, is deliberate in this regard, because I think it fits, it goes across a number of contexts. And what is bad manners in one context may not be the same in another. It can be swearing, taunts, or over-the-top claims. We can think of Marine Le Pen accusing rivals of being pedophiles. We can think of Beppe Grillo holding V-Day rallies against Italian politicians and the mass media. And if you know what V stands for, it's not in that V-Day, it's not very nice. It's like if we held FU rallies. And then Donald Trump was Donald Trump. I mean, we don't even need to go through his examples. But it's not just about, flaunting the rules in a kind of transgressive way by being rude. It's also can go as far as acting or presenting oneself in a more colorful way than we usually expect from politicians. And that can come also in the embrace of popular culture. Politicians doing things and utilizing popular culture in ways that politicians are not supposed to do in the way that we kind of expect from politicians. So 3 examples here. Hugo Chavez used to he had his own television show, Allo Presidente, that used to run for hours and hours, I believe on Saturdays. And he used to dance, break into folk songs, sing to his audience throughout the show. Things we wouldn't necessarily expect of politicians. Pauline Hanson, my hometown populist from Australia, this is her appearing on Dancing with the Stars, the reality television show. She's appeared not only on Dancing with the Stars, but The Celebrity Apprentice in Australia. She became a reality TV star in Australia in the early 2000s, which basically rehabilitated her career. And one of my favorite examples, this is Clive Palmer, who's another Australian politician. Just a glass of water before I describe what's going on here. This is Clive Palmer, who, let me be clear, this man was in Parliament. He is dressed in a bunny onesie, as you can see, this is in a promotional advertisement for a radio station in which he's singing an electro song while smearing peanut butter on the chest of a man wearing the mask of our Prime Minister. That's a sentence you've never heard in an academic presentation, and you're not going to probably ever hear it again. You can look that up if you want for your own pleasure. But it's just, these are not ways that we expect politicians to act. So this embrace of political, popular culture can set populists outside the mainstream, so to speak, and really do them a great service in terms of showing their bona fides as being part of the people. My colleague, Pierre Osterguy, says that we should think about this as the division between the high, which is anti-populism, and the low, which he thinks populism is the embrace of this low, this cultural low, this political low, and that this actually operates perpendicularly to the left and right axes, which you can see there. And we could actually map different politicians in these four different categories. So he says that that's what populism is all about. It's about that embrace of the low, and that can happen across the left and the right. I think some of the Dutch cases of populism throw this into a little bit of question, how far you can spread, which is why I don't go all the way with this. Terry Baudet obviously is a very interesting case in this regard. But I think it's worth thinking about the question of taste here and that populist embrace of the low, and how that ties in with how populists use popular culture. If we go back to kind of, those Bourdieuian notions of high and low culture, populists have an ability to use low political culture in seemingly authentic ways. So we can think about, we all know Donald Trump's rich. We all know he's a rich businessman. And so, but he has a long-running association with Worldwide Wrestling. Here, I believe he's shaving the head of Vince McMahon, who I think was the boss of Worldwide Wrestling. That guy became president. Abdallah Bukaram, he recorded an album of himself, his nickname was The Crazy Lover, and recorded an album of himself singing songs and distributed them to every public servant in the country. This is embracing the low. It can even go as far as like literal taste. This stuff matters. How many times have you seen Nigel Farage sucking on a dart, a cigarette, with a pint, a beer, showing that he's one of the people? Pauline Hanson, her claim to authenticity in Australia has been that she literally, this is not her visiting a fish and chip shop. She owned a fish and chip shop. She, that's common people's food. She's one of the common people. And was it this year or last year? I think it was this year, the debates in the Netherlands of Geert Wilders declining that he would not eat couscous. That's not food for him. That's multicultural stuff. He doesn't want any of that. So, we're talking about literal taste here. And I think, again, to come back, you always come back to Donald Trump, but Donald Trump's love of fast foods, particularly McDonald's and Diet Coke, is well documented. I've got some photos here, eating McDonald's on the plane, eating taco. The bottom left one here is quite most interesting. That's when he had the winners of the Super Bowl come to the White House and had like a McDonald's feast. And if you look that up, if you Google the media coverage of that, it is totally and utterly snarky and, making fun of, this stupid idiot is having McDonald's, trash food in the White House. The subtext is this is not good enough. This is bringing disrespect to the White House. And I think if you think about that kind of coverage, it tells you something about how much those taste distinctions come into play with populism. And if you think I'm, banging a drum that's not, going a bit too far, this is only food, have a look at this. My argument here is that populists not only can do this, but they can do it well. Because here's what it looks like when someone tries to do this and does it very poorly. So this is Mitt Romney trying to do the same thing. And I'll read these quotes out in full because I love them. Get out and vote next year. This is from a news article. No, this November, said Romney. At one point, stopping to guzzle a glass of lemonade, Romney was asked how it tasted, to which he replied, lemon, wet, good. Okay, it gets better. My favorite meat is hot dog, by the way. That is my favorite meat, he told a gathering of supporters as they joined him recently for a casual dinner organized by his campaign. My second favorite meat is hamburger. And everyone says, don't you prefer steak? It's like, I know steaks are great, but I like hot dog best and I like hamburger next best. To me, that sounds like what would happen if an alien came to Earth and tried to learn in a week how to talk in a folksy style and failed miserably. These are discussions I have at the dinner table with my 6-year-old. Hey, what's your favorite? Okay, he's vegetarian, so but what's your favorite fake meat? The point here is only partly to make fun of Mitt Romney. That's great, but the bigger part is to show how badly this can go, how poorly this can go for quote unquote mainstream politicians. And that populists, their performance of this authenticity, their performance of taste and embrace of low and popular culture is an essential part of their arsenal. Why does any of this matter? Like, what's the context in which any of this is going on? I think it matters because we're in a political world, at very least, marked by processes of media. Like, it's a mediatized political world. And mediatization, you can look there, but it's basically where social and cultural institutions and modes of interaction have changed because of the media's influence, and where these areas, to an increasing degree, are submitted to or become dependent on the media in their logic. And that's been a gradual process, but it's accelerated so much more quickly from the late years of the 20th century onward. And media, when we talk about media logic, we can talk about these kind of values and techniques. I won't read them all out there, but these kind of familiar things that you would think about how we cover politics now almost line up with all of these: simplification, polarization, emotionalization, negativism, prioritization of conflict, focus on scandals, and the privileging over the visual over other senses, which is kind of what I'm writing a book about at the moment. And I think what's important to note when you look at these kind of values and techniques of media logic is how much they actually line up with populism. So the features of populism as a political style, as I theorize them, and their corresponding aspects. Sorry, that's got kind of fallen off a bit, but this is from my book, my 2016 book. You know, these things line up almost perfectly. The dichotomy between the people and the elite with sports-based dramatization, that anti-elite sentiment, the prioritization of conflict, denial of expert knowledge, an anti-establishment attitude, under bad manners, that disregard for appropriateness, political incorrectness, and colorfulness lines up so well with personalization, stereotypization, emotionalization. And the same goes for crisis, breakdown, and threat. These demand to act decisively, the distaste for complexity, and the instrumentalization of politics almost as perfectly works with intensification, simplification, and the focus on scandal. And I think here, populism is essentially the political style par excellence in mediatized political times. And to see this, I think we can see how much blurring there has been between media, popular culture, and political figures when it comes to populism. So Sarah Palin, remember her? Not that long ago. You know, Sarah Palin emerged, obviously, as a politician, but she became, and has since done relatively well, as a media star. She had her own reality TV show with her family, Sarah Palin's Alaska. For a while, she had a Sarah Palin channel, became a best-selling author. She became a media star, and it's striking how much populists can slip often between these political and media roles. I mentioned Pauline Hanson earlier. She's a mainstay on Australian breakfast television. She was on Dancing with the Stars. She was on The Celebrity Apprentice, which was, you know, a nice Trumpian twist, of course. And well, she was also in a Donut King commercial. That's what's going on at the bottom. Everyone needs to make a buck somehow. And of course, the best example is obviously, would Donald Trump have been president if we didn't have The Apprentice? I don't know. And I think what happens here with these kind of blurring between popular culture, politics, and media when it comes to populism is that the effect of these performative acts is that populist leaders can become quasi-celebrities, known as much, or even sometimes more, for their media performances and stylistic outbursts than for the kind of content of their politics. And as politicians become media identities and celebrity heroes, the situation allows them to get away with things that they might not have been otherwise able to get away with, avoiding scrutiny because of their media glow and star aura that surrounds them. And I think we can see that starting to happen even with Tucker Carlson, who's being in the States, who's being kind of put up as potentially the next Republican star. This is again a media personality, not a political actor per se. So to draw this together, what are some of the kind of threads going forward that we can take from all of this? The first is that I think the populist right, you might have noticed I've spoken mostly about the populist right. I think the populist right is arguably better at embracing the low of popular culture than the populist left. Now that may have more to do with ideological divisions than both being populist. And there being certain genres that align with the right as opposed to left. I mean, we were talking a little bit before we started about Donald Trump's impeachment. Donald Trump's when he was brought into the presidency, having country stars and Three Doors Down, kind of a one-hit wonder bar rock band playing. Those are certain genres that align probably more with the right than the left. We got to think about what are the reasons behind that. The second is that politics, popular culture are not separate spheres when it comes to understanding populism, which everyone who's interested in this lecture series obviously gets. But I think what that means for us is we need more interdisciplinary work in studying populism that goes beyond political science, political sociology, and area studies. And I think the main reason for this is that all of those, obviously have their own methods and so forth that they bring to the table, but the focus of analysis is often almost blocked. Political scientists are not going to go and study popular music genres. They don't know how to do it or the tools to do it. And we can get set in kind of just being focused on populist parties, populist presidents, whereas there's a lot more going on. And even those political actors, even those populist actors are drawing on a far wider repertoire than we necessarily have the disciplinary language to deal with. And I think only in these kind of collaborations and in interdisciplinary work in studying populism can we actually get a sense of where that appeal really lies. I'll leave it there. I think I've hit my half hour with that plea for more exciting work of the type that you guys are doing, and I'm interested and happy to take any questions.